The mighty Megalodon is sadly extinct now, but when it was alive, it was one of the most ferocious predators ever to have roamed Earth's oceans.
Everything you know about the Megalodon is a lie. For 190 years, we've been hunting a ghost, a tank-like monster that Hollywood invented. But a massive break in the fossil record just shattered that image. New evidence reveals this wasn't a stocky great white on steroids. It was a slender, elongated hyper-predator that defied the laws of biology. We're finally seeing the real titan for the first time, and it makes the movie version look like a goldfish. Imagine the year is 1873. The world was still largely a mystery, and the crew of the HMS Challenger was hard at work dragging a heavy dredge across the floor of the Mariana Trench, the deepest, quietest place on Earth. They were looking for life, but what they pulled up into the moonlight was a ghost, a prehistoric ghost. Among the mud and the silt were two massive triangular teeth, but unlike most fossils, they weren't blackened or petrified. They were bright, pearly white and seemingly fresh. It looked as though the creature they belonged to had just finished a meal and was still swimming somewhere in the abyss. For 150 years, this discovery was the smoking gun for everyone who insisted that the Megalodon was still around, that the king of the deep hadn't vanished. He'd just retreated to the depths. We told ourselves that if the teeth were this white, they couldn't be millions of years old. Estimates started circulating that these teeth were perhaps only 11,000 to 24,000 years old. We wanted to believe so badly that we ignored the science right in front of us. But, you see, the Mariana Trench has a very specific way of keeping secrets. But before we get into these secrets of the trench, let's go back to the beginning, all the way back to the 17th century, where a bizarre case of dragon tongues would change the world of science forever. The genesis, the 1666 dragon tongue. Before the Megalodon was a Hollywood movie star or a staple of Discovery Channel Shark Week, it was a monster born of folklore. For centuries, people across Europe would stumble upon sharp triangular stones buried deep within the earth or embedded in limestone cliffs. They called them glossopetri, or tongue stones. Legend had it that these weren't rocks, but the petrified tongues of dragons and giant serpents turned to stone by St. Paul himself, and people actually wore them as amulets to ward off poison. But everything changed on a fateful day in 1666, off the coast of Livorno, Italy. Two fishermen hauled in a shark so massive and so alien-looking that the locals were paralyzed with fear. The local duke was so thrown off by the creature that he ordered its head to be chopped off and sent immediately to Florence, straight to Nicholas Steno, a brilliant Danish anatomist. As Steno began dissecting the shark's head, he had a eureka moment that would shake the whole of medieval Europe. He held one of the shark's teeth up next to one of those legendary tongue stones and realized they were identical. The stones weren't from dragons in the sky, they were from monsters in the sea. And that was when mankind first discovered the Megalodon. And everything we thought we knew about it since then may have been wrong. Steno had just discovered what fossils actually were, the remains of ancient life preserved in rock. And this breakthrough gave birth to the science of paleontology. But in his excitement to bridge the gap between myth and reality, he unwittingly set a trap for every scientist who followed him. And nearly 2 centuries later, another scientist would fall for it. Because he linked these massive ancient teeth to the common sharks of his day, the world assumed the Megalodon was just a really big version of a modern-day shark. Enter Louis Agassiz, a titan in the world of 19th century science. In 1835, he thought he had finally solved the puzzle of the Megalodon's identity. But little did he know, he was about to commit another blunder that would mislead the world for nearly another 200 years. When he sat down to officially describe the creature behind these massive fossils, he was looking at a jagged, serrated tooth that was almost the size of a dinner plate. And he did what seemed like the most logical thing in the world. He looked for a modern match. He found it in the great white shark. He looked at those jagged teeth and saw a great white, but on steroids. He officially dubbed the beast Carcharodon megalodon, placing it in the same genus as the modern great white, giving the Megalodon a name, a family, and a face that would haunt our screens for 2 centuries. Because Agassiz said they were related, We spent the next 190 years building museum exhibits, writing textbooks, and eventually producing multi-million-dollar movies based on the assumption that the Megalodon was just a larger, angrier version of the great white. We were so blinded by the similarity of their teeth that we ignored the vast, chilling differences in their DNA. By linking the Megalodon to the great white, we created a creature that never actually existed in the way we pictured it. We imagined a stocky, cold-blooded tank, never thinking that the truth would be significantly more alien. But why did it take us so long to realize the truth? Because sharks are made of cartilage, not bone. They don't leave behind full skeletons for us to study. We were forced to build an entire monster out of nothing but its teeth. We spent 2 centuries looking at the Megalodon as a cousin to the sharks we see today, never suspecting that it belonged to a completely different, extinct group of giants. However, to truly understand why this shark was so different and much more successful than we ever imagined, we have to look past the teeth and the fossils. We have to go back to the very beginning of its life, to a place where the sunlight never reaches, the womb. Because the Megalodon wasn't just born an apex predator, it was a killer before it even saw the light of day. The dark origin. In the natural world, we like to think of a mother's womb as a place of growth, safety, and peace. But for a prehistoric titan, the womb was the first battlefield. Scientists have discovered a chilling biological phenomenon called oophagy, or more bluntly, intrauterine cannibalism. Inside the mother Megalodon, dozens of embryos would begin to develop, but as they grew, the strongest, fastest-growing pups wouldn't wait for a meal. They would turn on their siblings, devouring the unfertilized eggs and even their weaker siblings to fuel their own growth. It pretty much ate its way out of the womb, and by the time a Megalodon was actually born, it was a battle-hardened warrior. Imagine a newborn baby already measuring between 13 and 15 feet long on day 1. To put that into perspective, a Megalodon baby was already larger and more powerful than a fully grown adult great white shark of today, because in the ancient oceans, even being a 13-foot killing machine wasn't a guarantee of safety. The waters were filled with giant raptorial whales and even other adult megalodons. This womb cannibal strategy ensured that only the most aggressive and physically dominant individuals ever made it to the open sea. While most creatures spend their first months hiding from predators, the Megalodon was born ready to dominate. Yet, even with this head start, these giant infants couldn't just wander the deep ocean alone without becoming a snack for a larger version of themselves. They needed a place to grow with less chance of ending up as a snack, somewhere their own kind couldn't reach. Scientists have long wondered where these massive babies went to grow up, and the answer was recently found buried in the dirt of Central America. It turns out, even the most feared predator in history needed a daycare of sorts, but this daycare was littered with bones of infants who didn't make it out alive. In a breathtaking discovery in Panama, scientists uncovered ancient, shallow-water nurseries where the water was too thin for the massive adults to navigate, but deep enough for the infants to thrive. For millions of years, these coastal sanctuaries were the only reason the species survived. Here, among the mangroves and the reefs, the young Megs would feast on small fish and test their strength. But don't let the word nursery fool you into thinking this was a safe place. When researchers began excavating the site, they found something that chilled them to the bone. The area was also a graveyard. Mixed in with the small megalodon teeth were the serrated marks of giant great hammerheads and other rival shark species. They knew exactly where the young megalodons were hiding. Some of the bite marks on these juvenile fossils also matched larger megalodons. It seems that when food got scarce, the adults would patrol the borders of these nurseries, waiting for a hungry pup to stray just a few inches too far into deeper water. These nurseries prove that the megalodon's life was a constant, exhausting struggle from the second they were born until the day they died. They had to grow fast, and they had to grow big, because in the open ocean, the only thing that protected you was your ability to kill anything that looked at you twice. And they were very efficient at it, because while the megalodon was growing in these graveyards, it was developing a weapon system so efficient, it literally littered the earth with its remains. When we look at a megalodon jaw in a museum, It's easy to be intimidated by the size alone. We're talking about an opening large enough to swallow 2 adult humans standing shoulder to shoulder without even grazing the sides. But the real terror wasn't the size. It was the teeth. A single megalodon jaw was packed with 276 serrated, razor-sharp teeth, arranged in 5 rows. But here's the really scary part. Unlike humans, who get 2 sets of teeth if we're lucky, the megalodon was constantly shedding and replacing its teeth. Every time a tooth became dull or snapped off during a struggle, the tooth in the row behind it would simply slide forward to take its place. Scientists estimate that a single megalodon could go through up to 40,000 teeth in its lifetime. This is exactly why megalodon teeth are the most common fossils found today. They were mass-producing them for millions of years, scattering them across every corner of the globe. These teeth were designed with one purpose: to grip and rip through the thick blubber and bone of prehistoric whales. The serrations were so fine, they acted like a steak knife, slicing through flesh with almost zero resistance. It was the perfect weapon for the perfect predator. For centuries, these teeth were all we had to go on. We looked at these massive, heavy triangles, and we assumed they belonged to a massive, heavy shark. But those teeth were about to tell a story far different from what Hollywood had been telling us. For nearly 200 years, we used these fossils to build a monster that looked like a roided-up great white. But as it turns out, we were all wrong. The 2025 bombshell, the slender revelation. In early 2024, and expanding into a massive 2025 report, a team of 26 international scientists, led by paleobiologist Dr. Kenshu Shimada and researcher Philip Stearns, went back to study a rare set of fossilized vertebrae housed in the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, and released data that changed how the world saw the megalodon. For years, we used those bones to estimate a short, stocky body. But Stearns and his team realized our math was flawed. When they re-examined the proportions, they discovered that the megalodon wasn't stocky. It was a long, slender killing machine that could grow up to 80 feet. Now, you might think a slender shark sounds less intimidating than a bulky one, but that change actually makes it more terrifying because a slender body means less drag in the water, and that means that it was a high-speed, long-distance pursuit predator. Philip Stearns noted that a slimmer, more elongated body suggests a longer digestive canal, meaning this shark could go longer between meals and travel further than we ever dreamed. A bulky megalodon would have created so much drag that it would have starved to death just trying to swim. But if it wasn't a giant great white, what did it actually look like? According to the 2025 data, the megalodon didn't have the pointed snout of a great white. Instead, it had a flatter, almost squashed jaw that gave it a much more primitive, alien appearance, with a shorter nose and wider mouth. But the most striking change was its fins. Because the megalodon was so much longer and more slender than we thought, it needed massive stabilization. Scientists now believe it possessed extra-long pectoral fins, almost like wings, that allowed it to glide through the water with terrifying ease. When you put it all together, the new Meg looked more like a lemon shark. In the old chunky model, the megalodon was a burst hunter, something that hid in the shadows and struck fast because it didn't have the stamina to chase. But the slender Meg was an endurance athlete. Its streamlined frame meant it could maintain high speeds over thousands of miles. But the true scale of this makeover was about to get even bigger and much more difficult to wrap our heads around. You see, when you stretch a shark out and remove the fat, you realize that to maintain that kind of mass, the animal had to be much, much longer. And we thought the ocean had a ceiling for how big a predator could get. We were wrong. For decades, the scientific community had a comfort zone. They looked at the massive teeth, looked at the great white, and decided that the megalodon probably topped out at around 50 feet, about the size of a standard semi-truck. But in a quiet lab in Denmark, one single bone was about to prove that the slender Meg wasn't just a change in shape, it was also an increase in size. This wasn't just any bone, it was a massive vertebra, measuring a staggering 23 centimeters wide. When scientists took the new megalodon proportions and applied it to this Danish vertebra, the result wasn't just a thinner megalodon, it was much longer. We weren't just looking at a longer shark, we were looking at a creature that rivaled the biggest animals to ever exist on Earth. The new 2025 calculations suggest that this beast reached a mind-bending 24.3 meters. That's 80 feet of pure muscle. To truly understand how massive that is, let's do a quick comparison. Imagine a standard yellow school bus. Now, put another school bus behind it. That is the length of one single megalodon. And if that wasn't enough, this monster weighed an estimated 94 tons. That's the weight of a blue whale. It means that the megalodon didn't just inhabit the ocean, it dominated it. But how does a creature that massive even function? How do you keep a 94-ton engine running in the freezing depths of the prehistoric sea? Most sharks are at the mercy of the water temperature around them. They are cold-blooded, meaning if the water temperature drops, their metabolism crashes. They become sluggish, their muscles stiffen, and they're forced to retreat to warmer currents just to stay alive. But the megalodon played by a completely different set of rules. Scientists have discovered that the megalodon was mesothermic, a fancy way of saying it had a biological heater running inside its massive frame. While the rest of the ocean was at the mercy of the freezing depths, the megalodon was pumping warm, oxygen-rich blood through its system, keeping its body temperature significantly higher than the water around it. From the tropical nurseries of Panama to the near-Arctic waters of the north, this warm blood allowed it to be the first truly global apex predator. But to keep that heat going, the megalodon had to consume roughly 1,200 pounds of food every single day. It was constantly on the verge of starving, which meant that when it found its prey, it couldn't just bite it. It had to end instantly. You've heard of the power of a T-Rex, but the megalodon was about to show the world what a bite really looks like when it's backed by 40,000 pounds of bone-crushing pressure. But as any high-performance machine knows, the more power you have, the more fuel you need. And unfortunately for the Meg, the gas station was about to go dry. For millions of years, the megalodon lived in a world of absolute excess. The Miocene oceans were essentially an all-you-can-eat buffet of small, fatty, slow-moving whales like the piscobalaena. These whales were the perfect prey, packed with blubber and lacking the speed to escape a 94-ton torpedo. Life was good, and the megalodon thrived. But Earth is a fickle host. About 3.6 million years ago, the planet began to change. The climate was cooling, and the vast, shallow seas that the megalodon called home were receding. Those small, oily whales that the megalodon relied on couldn't survive the change. They began to vanish, replaced by a new generation of whales, giants like the ancestors of the blue whale and the humpback. These new whales were faster. They could migrate thousands of miles into freezing polar waters, and they were far too large and agile for a bulky predator to catch easily. The megalodon was trapped. Its massive size, once its greatest strength, was now its biggest liability. It needed a massive caloric intake, but now it was forced to travel further and work harder for every scrap of meat. It was a slow, agonizing decline for a creature that had never known a rival. But just as the megalodon was at its weakest, a smaller, sleeker killer was beginning to emerge from the shadows. The rivalry. Enter the great white. While the megalodon was struggling, a new rival was rising, the great white. The great white wasn't bigger, and it certainly wasn't stronger, but it was smarter, faster, and, most importantly, cheaper to run. In May 2022, a groundbreaking study in Nature Communications used zinc isotopes from fossilized teeth to prove something scientists had long suspected but couldn't confirm. The great white and the megalodon were hunting the same prey. The great white didn't need to kill the megalodon to win. It just had to be more efficient. The megalodon needed a massive whale just to survive the day. The great white, however, could thrive on smaller fish, seals, and the occasional scrap. The great white could also reproduce faster, move more easily into shallow waters, and survive on a fraction of the food. The crown was slipping, and for the first time in 20 million years, the world's greatest predator was now finding itself outmatched and outpaced. The world had changed around it. The new massive whales were moving into polar waters, using their superior speed and endurance to leave the megalodon behind in the dust. It was too big and heavy to catch the new lightning-fast whales, yet its massive internal heater made it too hungry to sit and wait for the slow-moving prey that was already disappearing. For the Megalodon, every day became a desperate, losing game of math. To swim a mile, it burned calories it simply couldn't replace. Scientists believe that toward the end, these giants were no longer dominant predators. The largest, most sophisticated predator to ever live, a creature that had dominated every ocean on the map, had been reduced to a scavenger. As the population dwindled, finding a mate became an impossible task in the vastness of the cooling ocean. The nurseries in Panama were falling silent. The massive 13-foot womb cannibals were being born into a world that no longer had room for them. One by one, megalodons vanished in the silence of the deep, victims of their own perfection. 3.6 million years ago, the fossil record officially went cold. No more teeth, no more vertebrae, nothing. The Meg was gone. But even in death, the megalodon left us with one final, chilling puzzle. If it was so powerful, and its reign was so long, how did it leave so few clues behind? The manganese secret, debunking the trench. Remember those pearly white teeth from the beginning? The ones that the crew of the HMS Challenger pulled from the Mariana Trench back in 1873? For over a century, those two pieces of enamel were the holy grail for every cryptid hunter and megalodon believer on the planet. They looked so pristine, so sharp, and so utterly new that it felt impossible to call them fossils. But in 2025, science finally caught the culprit behind these fresh shark teeth. It was manganese dioxide. It turns out that the deep sea floor is rich in these minerals, which grow at an incredibly slow rate, literally millimeters every million years. When those teeth fell into the silt 3.6 million years ago, they weren't just sitting there. The manganese formed a chemical vacuum seal around the teeth, preventing the usual mineral replacement that turns fossils black or brown. It was actually just a 3-million-year-old fossil that had been perfectly preserved by the crushing pressure and the unique chemistry of the trench. When scientists finally analyzed the thickness of that manganese crust, the math was undeniable. The teeth weren't 20,000 years old. They were ancient. The science was clear. There is no secret population of giants hiding in the dark. But if the chemical evidence is so solid, why do we keep seeing monsters on our sonar? Why do fishermen still swear they've seen a shadow larger than their boat? If you spend enough time on the darker corners of YouTube or TikTok, you'll find leaked footage that claims to show a fin the size of a sail cutting through the water. The stories are legendary. Take the famous 1918 account from Port Stephens, Australia. A group of seasoned crayfish fishers claimed a ghost white shark, at least 115 feet long, swept past their boats. They were so terrified they refused to go back to sea for days. Well, you see, the ocean is home to some incredible animals, like the basking shark. These are the second largest fish in the world, and they have a habit of swimming in nose-to-tail formations during mating season.
The basking shark might look intimidating, but its diet is anything but fearsome. It feeds on tiny plankton and small fish, swimming with its enormous mouth wide open, filtering water through its gills like a giant underwater vacuum.
From the surface, two 25-foot basking sharks swimming together look like one 50-foot shadow. Add a little ocean fever and some choppy water, and suddenly you've got a megalodon sighting. Even more deceptive is the way their carcasses decompose. When a basking shark rots, its jaw and gills fall away first, leaving a long, slender neck and a small skull. For decades, these pseudo-plesiosaurs have washed up on beaches, convincing locals they've found a prehistoric sea serpent. Every time we look closer, the monster turns out to be a harmless basking shark or a trick of the light. Even as recently as 2022, a viral news story from NBC Boston sent the internet into a tailspin. A massive shark silhouette was spotted on sonar off the coast of New England. People were convinced the slender Meg had finally returned to its old hunting grounds. But when researchers investigated, they found it was a massive school of Atlantic menhaden, thousands of fish swimming in a tight, shark-shaped cluster. We see the megalodon because we want to see it. Our brains are wired to fill the gaps in the blue void with the things that scare us the most. But this natural human fear was something that certain people realized they could weaponize for profit. If you were watching TV on August 4th, 2013, you probably remember the moment. Discovery Channel, the gold standard for nature documentaries, kicked off Shark Week with something that felt like a global news event. Megalodon, the monster lives. It had everything: shaky footage of a boat being flipped in South Africa, expert interviews with marine biologists, and sonar pings that seemed to track a 60-foot shadow. We sat in our living rooms, leaning into the screen, convinced that we were witnessing the greatest scientific discovery of our lifetime. We saw the scientists, we saw the footage. But as the credits rolled, we learned the truth, and millions of us felt betrayed. It was a mockumentary disguised as a factual report. Those scientists were paid actors when the footage was scripted and shot with a high-end CGI budget, completely fabricated. The show was a massive success for the network, but it was a disaster for public trust. It affected actual paleontology for a decade, forcing real researchers to spend their time debunking a fake TV show instead of sharing breakthroughs that were actually happening. We wanted the monster to be real so badly that we ignored the most obvious, glaring piece of evidence staring us right in the face. If the Megalodon were actually down there, the ocean would look very, very different than it does today. Want the ultimate proof they're gone? Look at the blue whale. In the world of biology, size is a double-edged sword. For millions of years, while the Megalodon patrolled the seas, whales stayed relatively small. They were fast, they were agile, and they stayed that way because growing into a massive, slow-moving mountain of blubber was basically ringing a dinner bell for a 94-ton super predator. If you grew too big, you became a target that couldn't be missed. The Megalodon kept the size of every other creature in check. But then, 3.6 million years ago, as soon as the Megalodon vanished from the fossil record, whales exploded in scale. Without the constant threat of a slender 80-foot assassin waiting in the deep, whales were finally free to evolve into the gentle giants we know today. And they only grew this big because their only predator finally died. If the Megalodon was still out there, the blue whale simply wouldn't exist. It would be a 100-ton buffet. The very existence of these massive, vulnerable whales is the living, breathing evidence that the throne of the apex predator has been empty for millions of years. We've spent centuries building a monster out of myths, mistaken identities, and Hollywood special effects. We wanted a tank, a brute, a great white on steroids. But the truth science finally uncovered in 2025 is far more haunting. The Megalodon isn't a Hollywood tank. It's a slender, tragic ghost of a world we'll never see again. It was a biological masterpiece that owned the planet until the planet itself changed the rules of the game. If you're Team Slender Meg and you're ready to embrace the truth, tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Thanks for watching, and check out the video on your screen right now.